Exynos is back on the menu, and that means we can finally bring back a Samsung debate as old as time. After uniting all Samsung Galaxy S23 models under the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 for Galaxy, Samsung has decided to reverse course and bring back Exynos in some regions and Snapdragon in others. Now, in some markets like the US and the UK, you'll get Qualcomm's Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 across all three of the Galaxy S24 models, while other markets, like the rest of Europe and many parts of Asia, will get Samsung's in-house Exynos 2400 processor instead. The first question you're probably asking, and the only question that some of you will ask, is which chipset performs better? Which one puts up the better numbers? And is there just an outright winner that we can go, bam, that's the answer? After putting both a Snapdragon-equipped Galaxy S24 and an Exynos-equipped Galaxy S24 through the same set of benchmarks, we do have a definitive answer. And that answer is Qualcomm Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 easily puts up the better performance numbers across the board. Our typical slate of benchmarks includes Geekbench 6, PCMark's Work 3.0 test, and a trio of graphically intensive 3D Mark tests. Across all 5 of our tests, the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 came out in front. Granted, it wasn't a huge difference on the CPU-focused tests, somewhere around 5 to 7%. But when it comes to graphics, the Snapdragon was able to open up that gap quite a bit wider, especially on stress testing. Specifically, the Snapdragon-equipped Galaxy S24 shined in the wildlife test and the more intensive Wildlife Extreme test. It handed in roughly a 25% better score on the wildlife test, while the Wildlife Extreme was about an 18% gap. And the Snapdragon managed to maintain that edge through both of the 20-run stress tests. However, there's one area where Exynos is able to make up a little bit of ground on the Snapdragon, and that's when it comes to ray tracing. 3D Mark actually has a Solar Bay ray tracing test, which we put both phones through a stress test of, which means 20 runs back to back to back. And while both started at just about the same result, the Exynos chipset was able to both hold on to more of its performance over time, dropping to about 60% of its original peak. The Snapdragon dropped to somewhere closer to 43% of its original peak. Interestingly, the Exynos chipset did run warmer over the course of the ray tracing test, but it still managed to put up better and slightly more consistent numbers. So at this point, you're probably thinking, oh, no problem. I'll just find a way to get my hands on a Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 Galaxy S24, even if I have to import it. Well, I wouldn't go quite so fast. There's one other test that we haven't talked about, and that's a more in-depth look at how the battery of each phone lasts over time and through a bunch of the different activities that you'll use day in and day out. Despite its slightly lower performance numbers, the Exynos-equipped Galaxy S24 actually delivers better battery results across most of our key categories. The in-house test that we run on every smartphone battery that comes across our desk puts the phone through a series of different trials, including 4K video recording, 4K video playback, camera testing, and web browsing. And this time, the Exynos 2400 comes out in front, almost all the way across the board, and by bigger numbers than the Snapdragon chipset was able to put up in performance. It lasted about 17% longer in 4K video playback and around 14% longer in a simulated Zoom meeting, because sometimes you have to take a meeting on the go. But the biggest win for the Exynos chipset was a 36% increase in the standard web browsing. So whether you're going through Google News or swiping up and down the AndroidAuthority.com homepage. One area where Snapdragon still holds the edge is in 4K video recording, but you have to kind of think about the fact that you're probably not going to sit down and record 4K video on your phone for 20 minutes at a time. You might go for a bunch of shorter clips, at which point you're not going to notice as much of a difference. So now that we know that Qualcomm has the better performance numbers, but Samsung has the better battery results, let's take a quick look at why that might be the case. For starters, the Exynos 2400 uses a 10-core structure that has lower clock speeds across the board, with 1 large core, 5 medium cores, and 4 small ones. The Snapdragon 8 Gen 3, on the other hand, has 8 cores, with 1 large core, 5 medium cores, and 2 small cores. Although it has fewer cores overall, Qualcomm's cores have higher clock speeds, which helps to push a little bit more power through each one of them, which then translates into the higher numbers that you see once you finish a test. On the other hand, the Exynos chipset's increased number of cores and lower clock speeds mean that it's able to spread around those less intensive tasks a little bit better and kind of manage its power load a little more efficiently. That means if you're web browsing on the Exynos model, you're going to be able to spread the load across 4 cores that are a little bit less power hungry, while the Snapdragon chipset is going to spread it across 3 cores, each of which is looking for a little bit more power to keep going. Of course, our controlled benchmarking doesn't account for every possibility. You might run into different modem capabilities and experience more battery drain as you're shifting from one cell tower to another, which is going to skew your results one way or another. Our tests also don't account for other common tasks like streaming a Spotify playlist, using cellular data, and pushing it over Bluetooth. However, they do offer enough insight that we can make one very important conclusion, and that is the fact that the right Galaxy S24 for you depends on what you want to do with your phone all day. While the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 version offers better performance, especially in non-ray traced games, the Exynos 2400 configuration hands in slightly better battery life through day-to-day tasks, meaning that you might be able to stretch it a little bit further from when you wake up in the morning to when you go to bed at night. So if you're a gamer, go for the Snapdragon version. But if not, the Exynos 2400 is easily worth a look. And you can check out more analysis on both chipsets, as well as plenty more Samsung Galaxy S24 content over at AndroidAuthority.com.